coming up a coaching session about service design with Luis Tereno and Daniela Scalise. In this coaching session, we cover topics like service design business, impostor syndrome, how to feel less overwhelmed with the amounts of tools that are available to service designers.
What is the interplay, I would say, between service design methodologies and the business side specifically when you encounter a service design problem? On one side, what are the business problems that you usually face in a design situation, and how much they overlap with service design services and methodologies, for instance, in a workshop. And the other part I was interested in knowing is how much as a service designer you have to know in terms of business knowledge, business terminology, and how often do you, for instance, find yourself working together with business people or high-level management to take business decision in a service design situation, more or less?
So for the first question, which is kind of, where does service design overlap with business or not? It's a very complex thing because it really depends on the project. So that's kind of like, first thing is it depends on the project, and it depends on another thing, which is it depends on the company design maturity, if we can call it like that. And another thing, it depends on your own maturity within the company. So usually, at least that's in my experience, is when you start in a company, the trust level is quite low, which means they first throw at you tiny problems to see, can this person manage that? And then it's like a Mario level, or a Mario game, where you first have to make the first level. And then once you've done the first level, okay, this person can handle this kind of problem. Well, let's give her a bit more complex levels. And so therefore, if you're starting in service design in a big organization, it's not per se that you will start with very businessy things where you're going to be interacting directly with the CEO and this kind of stuff. Because obviously you need to basically pass the levels to show that you have a good understanding of the company and also that you build the trust. And that's something that takes, I would say, in my experience, it takes at least 1 to 2 years to get to the level where, people where you have built your track record. For Americans, it will be, they have credit scores. Americans have the thing where they have credit scores that prove that they can buy something and that they can repay something. And I feel it's basically the same, you have to build that track record. So that's maybe the first element. So if you're pretty new in a company, usually you won't really start with that kind of stuff. The other thing is the level of maturity that the company has of understanding that service design can also help the CEO, the business team, because there are different understandings of that, which are okay. There are people who say, hey, the service design stuff should be limited, is really working well for improving customer experiences. And that's great. And we just use it for that. Other people say, hey, other companies say, this is really cool to improve our internal processes. And it's already great that it's used for that. And others say, we can really think about our whole company with these tools from service design and mixing it with more of them. So they are quite interesting. I think there is a conference on the SDN conference in Canada. There was a talk about the maturity of service design. Let me just Google that for you and find if, yes, I will put the link in here so that you have it.
Thanks.
So that's why Miro is so fun, because I can just put in stuff that really quickly you then have it. So they have made a talk, and they have a model also, which is quite interesting about the level of maturity that exists in service design. And so basically what they're showing is that, first you have to, usually in some companies, it's just, we're going to explore it, try it out. We try a few methods. Then others are just at a stage later where they have already a track record of trying it in a few different projects, and it shows that it works. And then it's really, okay, we're going to scale it, and we're going to make it something that is not just in one department or in a lab, but it's used really within the company in general. And then it's really something that is then really part of the language, where it's just second nature of the culture. And then obviously you get to the stage where it's really thriving, and it goes even beyond that company. So that's usually the question, is to detect how mature as a company is on this service design stuff. If they use the term, it's already a good sign of maturity. And so that's, if you wanted to use a lot of service design methodologies in a new job, looking for these terms is already a signal of, do they understand it or not? But there is a big caveat here, which is, it depends on the country, because not every country uses the terms in the same way. For example, I think Finland, the UK are really mature in the term of language. They use service design a lot as a language. But if you take Switzerland, it's not a term that we use so much. We tend to use other terms like customer experience, innovation, design thinking, as other terms, but basically doing a lot of the same stuff than service design. So that's my little thing, is personally, I don't care if people call it service design or not, as long as the type of project and the type of work has the mindsets. If you call it zebras, I'm okay with it. It's
okay. So
just
you are
terms.
on that side, because I read several articles and watched videos and discussions on that call it whatever. And that's, I think, one of the first things that the book, This is Service Design Doing, mentions, like, call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
So you are at school, like, you still, like, you don't mind to be pointed as, the business transformation guy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
In my work at the Salvation Army, people call me the sticky note guy. They don't know what I'm doing. They say, this is Mr. Sticky Notes. We don't know exactly what he does, but he's a magician with sticky notes. And it's okay. If people say this is the best word that they find to explain it, it's okay. I don't need to school them and say, no, what we're doing here is service design. It has a history, and please be respectful of the history. It's that's not a problem. It's like when people mispronounce my name, I'm not offended, because I'm like, hey, it's okay. You make your best. You make your best trying to pronounce my crazy name, and that's already a lot. But again, we don't all agree on that. So there are people who are very much like, you should use the proper term, and the proper term is that. But then you create these religion wars where people say, this is UX, no, this is service design. And then when you look at the history of terms, it's always funny, because, for example, if you look at the term UX, Don Norman, I think one of the first definitions he used for UX is what I would say is perfectly service design, because he includes not only digital stuff, he says all the support, the services, and all of that, it's creating all these interactions. So usually when people fight about terms, there is a bit of a funny thing when you then tell them, maybe you should go back in history a few years to see how the term has evolved, and which version of the term are you using, or to who do you reference. But that's a little bit of a little parenthesis. And then finally, it depends on the projects. So it's a very Swiss answer that I'm giving you here, which is, Swiss people usually tend to say yes and no and all in between. And that's basically here the same, is it really depends on the project, and it really depends on the company. It depends also on your own maturity within the company, I think. But if you find a company that says, hey, we're looking for a service designer to transform the way we do business in general, then you see that there is a high maturity, and that you might do much work there. But again, depends on what the company needs and what the culture of the company is, because there are so many ways to arrive to a solution. Service design is only one of them, which is, I think, the humblest thing to say. And we practice that one. And I think no service designer practices only service design. It's just one tool in the toolbox. And therefore, there are places where you can use it because people are willing to use it, and there are places where it doesn't make sense because people just don't need it, and it's okay.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Does that answer a bit that question for you?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And it's also, I don't know, reassuring in a way, because yeah, as you said, especially the last thing you said, that I mean, you're not always needed. Like if you don't need it, there's no way to force it into an organization. And I think, yeah, I'm still like new, but I'm reading a lot of case studies, and I have actually read about what you just explained. Like it really, I see like, especially in some sectors are more service design mature than others. And also for me, I think this is like, as I'm looking for jobs, I mean, this is certainly not maybe some sectors I would aim at the very beginning, because I don't aspire, to work, I don't know, for a big insurance company when I start service design. But it's good to know that I see like many successes as well. And as you said, like many of these case studies outline the fact that there is a terminology, there is a culture there already, and they already experimented something. And most of all, there is some buy-in from the managers, from someone who is sitting up when this is happening. So because at the end, it also involves cultural shifts and cultural changes. That's what I've been learning. So there has to be someone that sits on a higher place and that says, well, okay, this is, I give permission, because especially for me, that I come from these very big bureaucratic machines. In the last 2 years, I worked for the UN, and that has actually basically consumed my life. This bureaucracy, vertical systems, top-down approaches. There is like basically no teamwork, no shared decision. It's just everything is top-down. So you just have to follow the rules, and that's it. And that was a bit disheartening for me, and very upsetting. And that's why I also decided to leave this sector, because it was like, but at the end of the day, it's even in private companies, like things are not as bureaucratic maybe, but there always has to be someone, if you like, that takes decision, that gives the go.
Yeah, and I think it's, as you say, it's easier to do that kind of work if there is already some traces of it within the company.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you can't do it in companies where it never happens, but it's gonna be easier if there is someone who supports it in some ways, who says, hey, yeah, that's a methodology we use, it's in our toolbox. That's already a lot, Even if they say it's in our toolbox, but we didn't use it yet, that's already making it your life much easier, because then you can speak about it, explain it more easily than if you're just coming and people say, you just need to do that job in the way that we usually do it. And when you bring something new, then you really have to do a lot of work in order to show, prove that is valuable. You had a second question, which was this question of how much of the business knowledge or terminology should I know? Obviously, knowing that service designers, we might have the chance to work on problems that are a bit outside of our expertise. And I think here the general idea for me is business is just another language or another thing that we interact with. Usually the way I see a service designer, is like a maestro in an opera. He's not the singer, he's not the one making the music, but he's the one who understands all the different pieces and tries to bring them together, And in the difference between service design and the maestro, that's where the analogy stops. Is usually you don't see the service designer, but you see the maestro. That's the difference. And therefore, I think obviously whenever you start a project where you are interacting with people from a new field, might be developers, very technical people, might be communications people, might be HR people, or might be pure business people. I think it's always valuable to try to understand a bit of the language and the culture from where they come. And that's not just true for business, it's true for any different part. So I think that the one thing that has helped me is to have a bit of a general culture about this kind of stuff, even without being a specialist on business, because I'm definitely not, but at least knowing a few of the terms that I feel comfortable in a conversation and I understand from what they speak, even if I don't understand all of the details. I think it's having a bit of a general culture helps. So that's, knowing basic stuff, like what is a KPI, knowing terms, like having read a bit of a strategy book or something like that. You don't need to have an expertise of it, but just understanding it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, which is lovely, is you can always ask questions. Mm-hmm. Because that's always and it's a powerful move, which is once you have a bit just the basic general culture that helps you to understand contexts, then when you ask a question and you play the dummy, when you say KPI, which type of KPI do you really mean? Is this a KPI for you? And then people start to teach you stuff, and in the way that they teach you stuff, they reveal not only they don't educate only you, but basically what they're saying, they're revealing the culture and the understanding of the company about what is business for them. Mm-hmm. Because that's one thing that I find always so funny is people use the same terms with different meanings.
Also in the same organization, you mean?
In the same organization, yes. And that's why being in a position where you know too much about something and you are then the term means that, and all the other definitions are stupid, is not the right mindset. It should rather be, I have a basic understanding and I'm happy to be taught. So, because what I see, for example, if you're working on a big strategy project, what's positioning for someone might be measures for someone else. Just because the terms they use, they don't use them in the same way. Which is not a problem if you're okay to ask, when you say measure, can you give me an example? And then the person says, oh, I mean this. And if in your head you use another word for it, it's not your job to say, in my head, I call it like that. It's like, oh, okay, now I got you.
I see.
So that's why I think having a bit of a basic knowledge is good, but then staying in that approach where you can ask for examples. Because in the end, people within the same organization don't use the terms in the same way. And that's something that is hard to fight. Some people try to fight it by creating a common language and making sure that everyone is aligned, which is a good way to do it. But if that's not your goal, then just asking the stupid question of, hey, cool, so you want to hear more specific KPIs. Could you please give me an example of what is a specific KPI for you?
Yeah.
And then the person will teach you. What's happening usually is that you're not the only one that doesn't understand, is that the people around are taking notes because they're, thank you so much that you asked. I never understood him.
It's so true. It's so true. Yeah.
And so to be of service, which is very much on in the topic, the best way of being of service for the company as of someone practicing service design with other people is to ask the stupid questions. Even if you already know the answer for yourself, just assume that you don't, because the other one might have another answer.
Yeah.
Which will reveal a lot. And that's a thing that I have to say, it's still a thing that I'm still learning, because I come with my own definitions that I explain to people, okay, so we're going to do this, and people agree. And then once we do the work, suddenly you realize, we didn't use the same terms. They have another definition. Shit, I forgot to give an example.
Yeah.
I forgot to say, when I say that, I mean this.
Yeah, wow, that is powerful. That is actually, can really spoil like a complete workshop. Like, no, yeah, cool.
So does
Thank
that does that does that answer a bit your question about how
you.
much you should know versus, again, it's a very Swiss answer, it's a you should know a little bit, but
Yeah.
still be curious enough to ask questions.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think you nailed it. It happened to me again as I worked extensively with people in the past that I mean, sometimes, and the reason, the interesting thing, especially in environments like mine, I don't know. I mean, I work for the private sector, but not as long as for the public sector, that people are
Yeah.
afraid. They're afraid, but not
Ah,
afraid. They're like a bit afraid, intimidating. They're
ah.
dead scared because
Mhm,
there are some, especially, well, it also depending on the people who are in the room, but the default state, even if there is just among colleagues or a small group, the default state is they are really afraid of saying things aloud or to speak
yeah.
up, or and not like, let alone to say, well, I didn't know it, thanks.
Mhm,
And it feels like you're really, and I think that's a big part, I feel, of a service designer. And that's how I found myself, compatible, I think, with this job, because you're able to relax the environment in this way.
yeah.
It's like you enter the room and ask questions, like you play the dummy, and you see that people kind of relax and they chill
Mhm,
and they open up a little bit more also among themselves. Because I think to some extent this is true in every company, public or private, but some environments are way worse than others. I mean, worse in the sense of people are really scared of speaking up.
mhm. I think it's interesting how you frame that, that the role of the service designer is in some ways to help relax the organization,
Yeah.
and to bring it back to a human level where I don't have to fear saying something.
Yeah.
And in that order to do that, often we need to lead by example, which is asking dummy questions so that people say, oh, that person asked a dumb question. She didn't get fired. She didn't get yelled at.
Exactly.
She was smiling. The other person smiled back.
Mhm.
Oh, that's something we can do. Instead of saying we can ask dumb questions, which we always say, but never happens, just asking them. Because then people have this, oh, I have the experience that it works. I think that's a powerful, powerful thing. Do you know the term psychological safety?
No, I don't think
Because
so.
because that's maybe a thing that if you're interested in that topic of
Mhm.
trying to create an environment, a work environment where people can speak up, there is this term that exists, which is called psychological safety. I think it was born around somewhere at Google, and I have a thing that I can share with you. Let me just find it. So let me find it. Psychological safety. I created a set of cards to help to do that in workshops. So let me find that again. Psychological safety cards. So basically, psychological safety is this idea that
Nice.
you are allowed to say something which might be stupid, which you're unsure of, which might be critical, and you know that you won't lose your job. People will not make fun at you directly or indirectly, and that you will be in a safe place.
Mhm, mhm,
And so
mhm,
there will no harm will happen if you speak up.
mhm,
And one of the best ways I find to create that is by doing two things. One is being the example, creating it by example. So showing all these traits. So if it's okay that it should be okay that I can disagree, sometimes disagree, in a very positive way, say, oh, that's an opinion. I personally have this opinion. How do you find, are these opinions compatible, or are they completely different? And that's a way of showing, hey, we can disagree, it's okay. Or saying stuff like, excuse me, I didn't understand that term, can you explain it? KPI, that's key performance indicator. Okay, this is a little bit fuzzy for me. Could you give me an example? Ah, okay. Basically a number to measure if we are doing right. Ah, okay, now I got it. Thank you so much. And that's one part is being the example. And the second part will be to have a few ground rules to play. Like kids do this thing that works really well. Whenever they meet, they have really quickly, they do stuff like, okay, you play bad cop, you play good cop, and I'm the prisoner. And if I'm on the stone, you can't catch me.
Yeah.
They spend just 1 second of a minute to do that, and then they play for hours. And sometimes these ground rules kind of help. And ground rules, but also like mechanisms to speak up, to have a way to say things in a maybe more indirect way, instead of saying, shut up, this is not a topic for now. Being able to say, I wonder if this will be a topic that we could put in the parking, which means basically the same thing, but which is a much more polite way to do it once you have set up that there is a parking somewhere in a meeting room where you can put sticky notes about stuff that are not relevant for now, but relevant for later. So these are kind of like, and these psychological safety cards that I've shared with you here are a mix of these ground play, these rules to play, and these mechanisms that help to say difficult things in a more gentle way. Like, shut up, I don't understand. Please stop making jokes or this kind of stuff.
Cool. Are you using them for your work as well? Like, did you create them for us, for the community, or are you using them?
So these basically are rules that I've developed over the years. I don't use them as cards per se. I use them rather as introduction parts in the start of my workshops.
Okay, cool.
Where I basically tell people, okay, and depending on the meeting and the types of people, I don't use them all. I might use other elements, but some of the elements come always back. For example, one of the elements that comes always is one which I learned the hard way, which was, so that's the backstory of it, is I had a workshop, thought, oh, with leaders, and I thought, okay, so they are leaders, so we can go quite quick, and they're paying me to come to explain stuff about service design. So I'm going to just explain stuff about service design and do the workshop about that, because that's what they are paying me for. So let's go. And so I went, said, hello, welcome, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we're going to do. And we did it. And basically what happened is that at the end, someone told me, oh, but it was very tough for me because this wasn't at all how we usually do it. And for me, it was interesting because I was like, oh, I missed the opportunity to tell something important, which I now do, which is at the start of workshops with new people that I don't know. Usually what I say at the beginning, I say, okay, so this is a workshop that I do with specific methods. And it might be new. Some parts might be new to you. And therefore, it's normal if it tickles you sometimes. As long as it tickles, it's okay. That means that you're a bit uncomfortable because it's new. But whenever it hurts, please tell me and we'll find ways to make you more comfortable.
I see.
And basically since then, I never had again that feedback from someone saying, but I don't change the way I do the workshop. I just say at the start, it's going to be strange sometime. It's by design. It's normal. And if it's too weird for you, you are allowed to speak up.
Yeah.
And just having the right to speak up usually makes it that you don't use it, but you don't need it.
Right. Yeah. But it's good for them to know. It's like making them feeling more comfortable, and it's just preparing them. I think it's always a question of expectations also, of course, but then I understand that something like service design can be quite, I don't know, unsettling. Something is like you would, if you never heard of it, or if you're new to some ideas, can cause some troubles, and people like, especially people in some positions, tend to be always a little bit skeptical. So it's a good strategy. Yeah, definitely.
I have one more resource for you. May I Is it okay if I share it with you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Good. I have one about the business terminology stuff, and I'm gonna just paste it there. It's an old thing that I created a few years ago, which is a dictionary of innovation terms, business terms, service design terms.
Mhm.
And I think it has kind of like 400 terms in it, and which I basically took out from many different places and collected there, and where you can then go back to the original source. And I didn't take like the most academic definitions by
Mhm.
design, but rather the definitions that were simple. So it's not like you won't find the definitions where you read the definition and you need another dictionary to understand it.
Yeah.
But it's more like the very casual definitions that help. And I think there is also like playlists in it where
Mhm.
you can basically find the business 101 terms or service design 101 terms. Or there is also one which I really like, which is a category of terms to impress people during their dinner parties, which is always fun because it's like stupid terms, like where people say, "Oh, this is fancy," "Oh, you're very smart."
To impress, like a dictionary.
Exactly, because we always need to do something to impress.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
I
thanks.
see. I
Thanks
see
a lot.
that we have Louis who joined us, but before we get to Louis, did that help you?
Absolutely, yes, enormously. Thanks a lot. And it's very nice to see that, of course, there is some compatibility of, as I first mentioned, between what you just said and my experience, even though, well, the environment and my job was in many ways different. But I found myself in many things that you said, and it's good to know about the business side, because of course when you are new to a sector, you're always worried about like what I should know, especially in something like service design, which is so holistic and is so open, and also it's all about a process. But things like business, or well, I think small, and especially when as a service designer, you might have to face stakeholders at a high level.
Yeah.
And you have to feel that at least you are prepared. So, and again, it actually helped a lot in having some clarity, because there is a lot of overlapping in my head at this point. And well, of course, confusion, but it's not only a question of terminology, it's really a question of seeing like how these two words interplay. And I guess business design, and the other big one would be psychology that you threw in as well. So that's great. So yeah, thanks a lot, Daniela. That's very helpful.
Do you have time that I share a last thing to you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Good, because I have one which I always love to share, which is, let me find it, because I have a course which is called What is Service Design? And in there, I have a little picture that I made a few years ago, which I find always fun. Just let me find where it is. The service design family, maybe that one. No. Yes, many members, one purpose. It's that one. So let me share that with you. So you might see in Miro this image.
Yeah.
So let me just tell it to you. Basically, how this happened is I was at a conference where people spoke about service design, and basically there was then a bit of a debate about what should we call it. And then one said, "Oh, it's called service design." Not the other was like, "No, we do lean and agile stuff, blah, blah, blah." And what you do, you call yourself. And I got very bored in that conversation because it lasted for hours about this, how should we call it? How do we call our jobs? Which is a very philosophical question. And you see, I'm not very philosophical. And basically in my head, I was drawing that picture. I was really drawing that one, which was, people, if you ask, what's your job title? People give you many different names, and these names, they evolve over time, and they are different in countries, but also in companies. And also personally, you might like to call yourself something else than that's your friends. But at the end, what do? It's like, I try to make humans happy. Or I try to make the world a better place. In the end, it's usually all the same stuff, and 80%, I would assume, of the methodologies are exactly the same. We use a lot of the same stuff that everybody else. It's just the 20% that might be a little bit different.
Yeah.
And that's if we are very proud. If we are more conservative, as what I would say like 95% of what we do is exactly the same as other people. It's the way we order it might be a bit different, and we might have a bit of extra sauce on it. And in service design, the extra sauce isn't that big. The extra sauce is maybe this view that we consider not only the user, the end user, but we consider also the backstage, the employees, the stakeholders, and that's maybe something that is a bit different from other places, where we really say that in a very clear way, that there are two sides and that these two sides need to be considered both as important. And outside of that, we just deal a lot, which is okay, and we put it in another way. So that's why I would say your confusion is not so much a confusion, is a good understanding. Because it feels confusing because it is confusing. The people who say service design starts here and UX starts here, that's people, in my understanding, is people who don't understand the reality. But the people who understand the reality, they will say, it's a bit blurry. Where the business starts, where service design starts, where UX starts, it's not so important, and second, we all use the same tools in different ways, and we rearrange them. And the most interesting question is like, what are we trying to do, and not so much what do we call it. But that's, again, it's a very personal thing. The terminology part is maybe sometimes can create wars.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. It's been fantastic, super insightful. Thanks.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate your presence, your time, and I think I was very lucky to have I used all, in Asia, what they say, Daniela, you use all your luck today. So for today, no luck anymore for you. So that was my shot. I got it. So thanks a lot. You were my luck today.
I'm happy it was useful to you. And if you want to go, you're free to go, obviously. But I see that Louis is here, and so I will just say hi to Louis because he got the flu, apparently, I see in the chat. So hello, Louis. Are you here with us?
I'm very sorry I got the flu, and today I was feeling very sick. I took some medicine and I'm now feeling a little better. But I am really sorry. I don't know if you are finishing the session, but if you are, I'm okay with. So I don't know if you are finishing. It's okay too. I was going to just ask a little question. I have been encountering very many critics of the design thinking approach. And I was curious to know how you feel about it. Many people have been championing the idea that system thinking is more of a more productive approach and have not the weakness of design thinking approach. And I'm reading about systems thinking. I like it, but at the same time, I am a little confused how you really explore the tools of systems thinking in real projects that are not of social nature. I think.
Hello, I just lost you, I think. Are you still here, Louis?
Yes, I am here.
Yes. Okay, so your question, if I got it right, is systems thinking a better approach to design thinking, which is criticized a lot these days? And if yes, how can it be applied?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So first, for your understanding, this call is recorded. I will take pieces of that recording to share it then further with other people so that more people can benefit from this call. So that's an important information for you to know, obviously. And yes, we did already an hour, but today is a lucky day for you because my wife and my kid are not at home. That's why I had the chance to make this additional coaching session. So I have a bit more time than I have usually. So, and no worries, we are all sick from time to time. You shouldn't be ashamed of it or say sorry for being sick. It's always a good thing that you take care of you when you're sick, and that's a good example that you're giving us. So I have more time. If you are happy to jump in for a few more minutes, I'm happy to do it with you. Will that be okay for you, Luis?
Okay, it's okay.
Wonderful. And for you, Daniela, if you want to stay, you're welcome to stay. But I know it's a bit, and if you want to live in the middle, you can live in the middle, no worries. You just leave whenever you feel you're not getting more value of it, or you have other things to attend to. Is that okay for you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Daniela.
And that's exactly the kind of psychological safety we spoke about before. It's like just creating the frame so that people feel comfortable. Okay, so your question, Luis, is I hear that many people say design thinking and therefore also service design is something that has many flaws, and system thinking is a more suited approach. And is it the case? If yes, how should we apply it? So there is a big bias I have to reveal before I answer this question, which is I'm not a system thinking practitioner. So take everything I say with a big grain of salt. My understanding of it is small. So what I will say just is how I understand parts of it and how I deal with it. So basically, for me, there is this part which is, as always, people always have this view of saying, let me say it like that. When the iPad, when TV came out, people said, this is the end of radio, and years later, what we see is radio is still something happening. What has changed is that radio isn't the thing that is used for every type of sharing of communication. It has become more precise and more niche and more specific. When then the iPad came out, people said, books are dead. And I don't know you, but I have many books. And if we look at the background of Daniela, we see that there are many books. And still, she might own an iPad. But and what does this show is that whenever comes a new product, a new way of thinking, it doesn't replace completely the one from before. It just helps the one from before to be less general and more specific. And so, for example, with books, the thing that changed is that you don't print anymore, like your manual of Photoshop, which is a 120-page thing. You don't print that because it's easier to get as a PDF. You can search in it. It's even easier to get it on the internet. And it's more, but still, reading a good book on the beach, there I won't take my iPad because it will get broken, and I kind of enjoy this feeling of being outside with a very good book, or having a book full of my family memories. It's also something where the book has become very specialized and very good. And I think it's the same with design thinking versus system thinking, which is that system thinking helps us to not apply design thinking where it doesn't work so much, but it works still in many places. And that's where I think I make a bit of a different approach. So in my opinion, system thinking is another great tool in our toolbox because it helps us to think about problems in a different way. And that's a very good thing. And it forces things like design thinking or service design to be more specific. And so instead of being the one tool that you use for everything, if you know a bit about system thinking, you can recognize, oh, here I'm in a problem that is very social, as you said, that is interacting with many different people, with cultures, with also not just people, but also complete ecosystems, thinking about nature, thinking about cultures and this kind of stuff. Then system thinking is a much better tool than service design. But if you want to improve, let's say you are working in a cafe and you want to improve the waiting time, then definitely service design is a very good tool. And system thinking might get you thinking about stuff that is very interesting, but not very useful at that moment. Same thing is if you use service design to solve these kind of very complex problems, these weird problems, then you might end up with solutions that are very practical, but that solve only a tiny bit. And that might be even dangerous because then they have kind of domino effects in the end, which might be a bit dangerous. So in my personal work, which is usually rather on the simple problems, I kind of like this part of the world. Let me do a bit of a sketch here. So you see the mirror board, is that correct, Luis?
Yes, yes.
Good, wonderful. So one thing I usually have is like, so if we say there is the level of impact and the level of effort, and you might have seen that 1,000 times. And usually what people are doing, so if we cut that like that, usually people want here, they want the most impact, etc. And they are willing to do a lot of work. What I try to do is rather the part which is here, which is just here, which is, it's a very, 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 very tiny effort, or let's correct it. What I'd like to do is this part exactly here, where it's good enough impact, but basically no effort. And that's what I try to do, which is very simple stuff, and because the part here is sometimes very philosophical, it's more dreams, you doesn't always work. But if we can get here or somewhere here, then service design is very, very helpful here. And I think that's basically why I would highly recommend, if you feel this system thinking is something that that you recognize a lot of critiques that you agree with, go on, learn it, so that you can then say, this is a moment where I apply rather my system thinking approach, and this is a moment where I apply rather design thinking approach. Like in your kitchen, you don't have just salt for everything. There are some things that need sugar. And having both, sometimes you even have to mix them together. And would it be interesting for you to see how system thinking and service design can mix together? Is that something that you would be interested in?
I'm sorry, the dog is barking very loudly. Can you repeat the question?
No worries. Would you be interested in seeing how service design and system thinking can also be merged together?
I have been reading a book from Sherry Kababa. I don't know if you know her. It's basically a book about mixing design thinking with system thinking.
Great.
It's interesting, but I think you have made a good point, because we do not always have to take care of so much of a big problem, like, for example, homelessness or service for homeless people to eat. These are very complex problems that perhaps system thinking have a more suitable approach.
Definitely.
But I agree with you. I think for other problems, like, for example, you said the cafe, I think the design thinking, I think service design, as we know it today, have more helpful tools and more helpful approach too.
Mhm.
So I'm liking where you are going. I think you have answered in a very good view, and I'm sorry too because English is not my first language, and
No worries.
I
Neither mine.
and sometimes I have not having much opportunity to use it,
Yeah.
so it's a little bit rusty. But I think I like the approach you are having. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, yes, you answered it very well. Maybe one thing that I'd like to add as you're speaking, for me comes this clarity that it's not service design or design, or it's not, the question is not so much should I use system thinking and not use any more service design, or should I use service design and not system thinking, but rather the options are much larger, which is for simple problems, use service design. You know, for complex issues, use system thinking. And in the middle, you can always mix. You can always mix them together somewhere. You know? And I think that's a bit of the difference that I try to, whenever I teach in universities and this and design schools, when students start, often they are in what I call ayatollahs of methods, you know, or pastors of methods, where they say this is right, this is wrong. And what I try to teach them is that there is no right nor wrong. It's you just have to use things and learn how to use them and adapt them to your contexts. So and here's basically the same. It's not saying that all of service design is shit or all of system thinking is shit, but rather to say there are moments where service design is really shitty. And we should be smart enough to acknowledge when it's a good tool and when not. And sometimes we need two tools to get to the solution. And here is again this image of saying it's salt and sugar. Sometimes you want to make something sugary, then use sugar. Sometimes you want to make something salty, then use salt. And sometimes you want to make the best bolognese like my nonna does, and you have to put some sugar in the bolognese sauce to go with the salt, because that's what makes her bolognese sauce so good. And I think that's basically the same thing here.
I think it's a very sensible answer, and I like the Bolognese metaphor. I think you really made a good example. I understand. I think I was feeling a bit overwhelmed. Sometimes you just have too many things to learn, too many things to be aware about, and it makes us feel crushed by the quantity of things to learn, the quantity of things to use, and this feeling of overwhelming. I think you helped a lot with your answer. I'm very glad to hear you. It was really helpful for me.
But my pleasure. Do you have anything else you'd like to discuss?
I was thinking about there's so many tools on the toolbox.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what do you normally use in your toolbox? What do you think it's, for example, now I am getting to a job with clothing store.
Mhm.
And I was thinking how can I approach it, and I started to make a list of tools. Like I said, one of the problems I have facing now it's this anxious about tools, about methodologies. I think it's a bit of imposter syndrome, where you think, okay, do I really know enough to tackle the problems? It's a bit, like I said, overwhelming, and I got to a post where people have used some examples of tools of service design and trying to find it here. Let me just try to. I was sending this to a girl. Let me see. Let me see. Yes, I found it. So, for example, this post was saying that for discovery mapping, there are some tools. I know all of them, but let me see. One tool that I'm curious about is when to use a stakeholder map or an ecosystem map.
Okay, so you have basically three questions. Let me write them down. When to use a stakeholder map or ecosystem map. So basically, if I understand you correctly, you have three questions. One, which is, I'm getting overwhelmed by the amount of tools. Which tools do you use? Which will be one. The other question is, I sometimes struggle with my imposter syndrome and feel that I don't know enough to tackle the problems. How can I manage that? And the other one, which is a very practical one, which is, when should I use a stakeholder map or ecosystem map? Did I get you right, Luis?
Yes, you got it.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start with the first one. So if you say, I'm getting overwhelmed by the amount of tools, which tools do you use? It's quite simple. I have to say, I don't use many tools. I don't use many tools, and the tools that I usually use are just a few, which are interviews. That's something that I use a lot. Workshops. That's something that I use a lot. And good old sticky notes in all the formats you want, digital, non-digital, etc. And that's something, and just writing. That's basically, if we summarize it, that's the most of what I do is comprising that kind of stuff. Because sticky notes help me to map things, to synthesize information, to make synthesis. So basically to say, oh, now I understand what people are saying to me. With workshops, what I can do is bring people together and make them find solutions together. And interviews are basically trying to understand people. And writing is basically what I use to understand what I learned, share what I learned, propose plans for the future. And if I'm so that's kind of like the simplest answer is, I don't use so many tools myself. I still like to look at what are the new tools that come out, because I'm a bit of a geek. So therefore, I'm very curious to see what are the new things that come out. But I don't change my toolbox as often. And the image that I'd like to share is this one: is a carpenter can build a house with just a few tools. And it's amazing that they can build a house, a church, something gigantic with just a hammer. I don't know the terms in English, but things to saw and a few things like that. It's not 200 different tools, it's a few dozens. And they can build whole houses with that. And I think in the world of design, it's not so different, with a few good tools that you know very well. That's the difference. Is if you know the tools very well, then you can use them a lot and to create very good stuff. And that's the image that I like to give, is yes, it's important to know that there are different tools, because so that you know that when you are in a situation where you feel the tools I have don't really help me at this moment. Oh, I've seen that there are these tools that could help me, so now I'm going to learn and use a new one. And so that's basically at the stage I am. I'm more in this stage where I feel I have my basic toolbox set up, and every year I might add a new thing where I feel, oh, this is something that I really want to master, and then I really learn it deeply. And otherwise, I still stay curious, and look and go, like in French, we say window shopping, where it's you go and you look in the window and say, oh, this would be nice, huh? But you don't buy it, but you still imagine yourself using it and you say, I would be nice in that suit, and you just keep it in your memory. And the day you have a wedding, you know where you go buy your suit. And I think that's basically the same relationship I have with tool, where I do a lot of window shopping, but I'm quite reluctant at the moment to just use many new things, because I can do a lot with what I have. But still, if there is something that I feel is really helpful in that project that might be new, sure, I can use it. But I feel that a lot of the times these are the big tools that I use, and then there are variations of it. For obviously workshops, you have many different types of workshops and many different flavors of it. But yeah, that's basically the few tools I use. And maybe that's also, when looking back, I think I've changed a bit with the years, I have to say. Like 5 years ago, I would say that I was still in a phase where whenever I had to design a workshop, I wanted it to be totally different from each workshop I made before. I was in this phase where I still wanted everything to be very custom, very special. And now I'm in a phase, I call it being older or more mature, I don't know. But I'm in a phase where I reuse more stuff that I have used in the past, where instead of just rebuilding new things again and again and again, I'm like, oh, I created this thing, and so I'm going to reuse it maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 times and tweak it a little bit. And that's a bit another way of working with tools. And I think that's the difference here, is that you are in phases of your job. When you start, you're really in a period where you just want to try everything, and suddenly when you arrive at a stage where you have tried a lot, you see what really works. And once you get to that, then you stay a bit more close to these things. Like in relationships, when you're very young, you invest time with many people, and the older you get, the closer you get maybe to your family or your few friends, because you invest more in these relationships than trying to get a ton of new relationships. And I think it's basically the same with tools. Does that answer your question, Luis?
Yes, I think I not only got the flu, I got LinkedIn sickness.
Yes,
because,
absolutely. FOMO.
because you are always seeing someone talking about this and that too, and you feel like, okay, and this is inventing the following question that is the impostor syndrome.
Yeah.
Because you think, well, am I really prepared? Because there is that too, I don't know that too. There's that another two, and I also don't know this too. And people are sharing all the time, oh, I learned so much in that course.
Yeah.
And this and that is what I have learned, and these tools and these methods. And I think it's that the feeling of overwhelming that I was talking about, and this leads to the imposter syndrome. And I think you have answered well my question, and I think a little bit answered the imposter syndrome question already, because like I said, this feeling of overwhelming leads to the imposter syndrome.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think if we go on this question, of do I know enough to tackle the problems? How do I manage my imposter syndrome? I think, let me say it like that, is one thing that can help is go less on social media. It just helps, I don't say don't go on social media, but rather to say, hey, if you go once every 2 days, once a week on it, and you just look at what's there, you'll get, all the news and the interesting stuff, but without this constant feedback of I don't know stuff, because basically social media gives you this feedback that you know less than someone else, but you don't remember that you know also more than someone else. Social media doesn't give you that feedback. It doesn't tell you, hey, you already know so much and you're already so great. It's not helping you in that direction. It's helping you to see what you miss. And this, which is not a problem as long as you do it only a few times per week. Because then it's really helpful to see, hey, I see that Daniela has discovered a new tool and I'm going to look at it and I'm going to look at a few things, and I will maybe have this feeling that, oh, Daniela is so much more awesome than me, but it's just going to be this 1 hour during the week and not this constant feedback. And I think we have to be a bit more mindful with that kind of stuff. So that's maybe the one thing. And the other thing, at least that helps me, is, showing your limits at the start of the project. So let me just write that down, showing your limits at the start of a project. So whenever I feel I feel that I'm not the right person to do something, I tell people, as I told you, you said, you asked me a question about system thinking, and I told you, I'm biased. This is what I know. I know little, but this is the answer I can give you. And in projects, sometimes I do the same, where I say, this is a very complex project. What I can bring as value is this. Is this helpful? And if yes, we can start a project together. And my limits are these. This is where my knowledge goes. It goes from here to there. And I can help until there. If that's what you want, wonderful. Let's work together. But if you want someone that is above that line, then wonderful, find someone else. And which is a very good thing to do, because usually people say, oh, no, we just want to work with you, Luis, because you're a great guy. We don't care how much you know now, because you're going to learn a lot, obviously. We just want you because you're a curious guy and we like you. And I think that's something that helps me usually, is to reveal the limits I have, because by revealing the limits I have, people usually reveal to me the real reason why they wanted to work with me, which usually wasn't my knowledge, but rather my way of working. That's something that I discovered also not so long ago. I asked a few people who came back to me who always come back to me to facilitate workshops, and I asked them, but why do you come to me for workshops? And their reasons were not because I'm very skilled in my way of working, or because I bring always new stuff, which I thought was the reasons that they got with me. It's just that you're a nice guy to work with. It's so easy to work with you, and you're so reassuring. We've worked with other people and we felt unsure, and you just give us the feeling that it's going to go well. And that has no price. And plus, you're just funny, man. And you're like, okay, so you're paying me $1,800 a day because I'm a nice guy who's fun and who is a bit reassuring. And that's a good funny thing. So maybe that's an exercise you can do, is ask people who work with you and like you, what do they like? And you will be surprised. It has nothing to do with how knowledgeable you are or how smart you are, but usually it's more about character. It's like, oh, your energy, it's your smile. My wife is a pastor. And usually what people tell her as feedback after she has made a very good talk at the service is not, oh, this was so insightful, it changed my life. Or, oh, when you spoke about that verse in the Bible, it really changed my view of the world. Usually people go to her and say, you have a wonderful smile, which is good. They got really into it so much because she has such a brilliant smile. And yes, that was for them also a sign of the moment they shared with God. But it's very practical. It's more on the character side. And it's very humbling in a way, but it brings you back to the basic stuff, which is, you don't know so much, and it's not so important, because what is important is your character, and that's why people like to work with you. And sometimes only just your time. That's even the more humbling thing is when you tell people, yeah, I don't know that. It's like, we don't give a fuck. We just need someone to do the work and to spend the time. And you have the time, so it's okay. And you'll learn. And that's okay. I think that's stuff that helps me to tackle that imposter syndrome. But in the end, let me also say that to you. From time to time, I have people who come to me and say, wow, Daniele, you're so knowledgeable and you know stuff and shit and things. And you've wrote books and you're teaching at universities. Wow. And my reaction when they tell me that is, in the back of my head, I have a little voice that tells me, they don't know that you don't know. They don't know that you don't know what you're doing. And they don't know that you shouldn't be there, And so this imposter syndrome is also a positive thing. And that is a positive thing that stays because it helps us to stay curious. So at the same time, we have to fight it, when it goes into the part which is dark, and which makes us feel like less than what we are and stops us from being curious and working because we feel we are not allowed to. But when it's something that motivates us to say, I can know more, I should know more, I have still possibilities to learn and grow, then it's something very positive, and that you can nurture in a way that say, okay, I'm going to continue to learn because I know I'm not perfect and I know I will never be. And so it's not trying to remove the imposter syndrome, but rather to use it as a positive force that makes you go forward. What was very philosophical, sorry for that. But sometimes with this kind of stuff, it's a bit philosophical, where it's not like imposter syndrome is a bad thing, but rather say, hey, it's something that we have to learn to deal with and take out the bad parts, but it will not go away. That's about the sad news. But if you can manage it, it's a good news. How does that feel to you, Luis?
I feel better. I feel better. I think you also answered this question very sensibly, in a very sensible way. I think I was feeling that because I was searching for a job recently,
Yeah.
and so I was going to LinkedIn every day, and many hours of a day.
Yeah.
So these problems I was feeling about the tools, about imposter syndrome, is a collateral effect of the many times I was using the many hours I was using LinkedIn. So I think I feel better now, listening to you, to your experience in dealing with these problems. And you are very practical, and I think it's a good way to see those questions. And I don't mind you being philosophical. I think this question is a bit philosophical also, and the answer can get a bit philosophical too because of that. So it's no problem that you were philosophing about how you deal with it, and I was charmed about the story of your wife. So the smile is a great thing, and sometimes is all you need to feel better. Someone that can make you feel reassured, make you feel nice and secure, and you have the same experience too. Also, the people that tell you that you are a funny guy, that you are here sharing. I think it's a great example of how things are in real life, and not so much in social media, in all this sometimes garbage that we care about. So I think it's a good way to see things. I'm really glad that you shared your experience in that problem.
I think there is another point which is quite important to add here, based on if you're looking for a job, you might feel a big imposter syndrome. Why? Because job offers, usually list all what they expect for that candidate. And what people think, or sometimes where people make a mistake, is when they read the job offers, they read, I should be this person. But it's not a job offer, is a job description, is not the description of a person. It's a wish list to Santa Claus of the perfect person they'd like to have. And so in a wish list, usually you have things that in the end you will never get. It's like when I made a wish list to my parents when I was a kid, and they said, I want to have a PS5, which at the time didn't exist. Maybe they didn't got me this, but they get me, a set of cards. But still I was happy because I get something to play. And I think it's the same with job offers, where companies put out this, we want all of that, and then they get in conversation with someone, and then they say, oh, it's not exactly what we dreamed of, but this person is good enough for what we want. It's the right person for that. And we didn't know that we wanted that type of person, but we had to go through the motions of making our wish lists to then get some gifts. And I think it's the same thing. But the problem is that when you read all of these, and you read these job offers not as wish lists from companies, but as you have to be like that, you can feel very shitty, because you're comparing yourself to a wish list, which is not possible, because it's dreamlike figures, it's godlike figures of work, and nobody is like that. Nobody has 30 years of experience in all of these fields and can do all of the practical things plus all the philosophical things plus all of the business things. That's normal. But still, it's important that the companies put out these elements so that you can say, I can answer in your wish list to this, this, and this, and I can learn to this and this, but I can't help you with that. And that's exactly what a wish list is for, is as your parents do the same, or as a parent, you do the same. Your kid brings you a wish list and you say, okay, this, yes, we can give you a set of cards. Wonderful. You want a new house? Forget it. You want a dog? No way. and then you start to negotiate. I think here again, job offers, the way we read them can create a lot of this imposter syndrome. And reminding ourselves that it's just a wish list can lower this fear of, oh my God, I don't know shit, I'm not good enough.
Right. I think that my little experience, I'm not as seasoned as you are, or other people, because I have moved to service design recently,
Yes.
In relative terms, I have not that many years of experience.
Mhm.
So I think that it's also something that play a role in the perception that I have about myself.
Might I ask something? How old are you?
32.
32. Okay. And there are approximately 365 days in 1 year. So you have the experience of 11,680 days on Earth. That's quite a good level of experience, I would say.
Right.
It's and that's always what I try to tell people who transition to service design and say, I have no experience. I say, no, you bring a lot. You just now it's like learning a new language. It's not that you don't know any language, is you learn a new one, and you can use bits of the past languages that you know, because it's like learning, if you know Italian, learning French, it's basically that when you learn a new job, as long as you're not going from nuclear scientist to garbage collector. That's very two different ways. But as long as you stay in jobs where you have to deal with people, it's like you're staying in this Latin world, maybe, of languages, and you go from French to Italian. And there is a lot of things that you can bring with you, even if it at the start doesn't feel like it feels like it's a completely new language. But the more you get into it, the more you feel, oh, hey, it's interesting. We say this thing and this thing is basically the same. We just pronounce it differently, but it's written in the same way. And so it's basically the same. And so I think you will soon discover that it's not as different as that, and that your 11,680 days of experience of life will be tremendously useful.
Right. You are right. I think it's a really good answer to that. It's I'm a bit fearful about my little experience, but when you look in other way, like you were saying, this is not the only experience I have in life. I have been a UX designer for many years, and so I think I can bring some of the things I learned as UX designer to my practice of service design. And so it's not like I'm just beginning now. It's like I have been collecting experiences throughout all my life. So you are right. I think it's a good answer too.
And maybe a last point on that before we jump to your last question is, especially when you transition from UX to service design or similar practices, business design to service design, or graphic design to service design, or innovation to service design, these kind of fields, I think there is something that people forget, which is that if you change jobs within your field, you might have experienced that when you change company, it feels like changing completely changing discipline sometimes. Like the way a company does UX and how another company does UX is sometimes so different that it feels like changing discipline. And so therefore, for me, someone who changes from UX to service design, I'm like trying just to remind them, do you remember when you changed job from one company to another, how it was also a bit difficult because they had very different ways of doing the same thing, like the way they said, oh, in our company, we do interviews in that way. And in the other one, they said, no, you have to do it in that way. It's very different. And I think the same will happen when you go from UX to service design as when you go from a UX company to another UX company. And so it's the terms obviously change a bit more, but still the level of change is quite similar. It's quite as big. But let's maybe go on your last question, which is, when to use a stakeholder map or an ecosystem map. Here, again, I have to say, it's not a tool I use so often. So it's the one few moments I had to use it is whenever I feel, and it doesn't happen so much, is whenever I feel I need to better understand the context I'm working in. And then having a stakeholder map really helps, just to, and not to do it myself, but rather to go to people and say, hey, can you show me how the company works? Where are people? And who are the people involved in this project? Then it's something that is really helpful. And also then to compare the different views and say, okay, these are the different views that are within the company. On my level of the type of work I do, it's not something that I use as much. But again, if you work on very complex projects, that can be something that it can be more useful to understand the complexity of the ecosystem you're working with. But again, I'm here very practical, which means I work usually on problems which are simple enough that these types of tools are not so helpful. Again, if we take the example of you're trying to improve the waiting time of a cafe, making a stakeholder map or ecosystem map will not help you so much, I believe. It might even create more chaos in your head. It might create a bit of an information overload when you don't need as much information sometimes. And so the question always when you use such tools, which are mapping tools, is always the question, will more information help me better do my job? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no, especially with stuff like stakeholder map or ecosystem maps. Does that help you, Luis?